The city of Detroit had fallen quiet long before midnight, its skyline reduced to a blur of cold neon and distant sirens. Inside the sleek glass building of Nova Dynamics, an empire of algorithms and ambition, only one man remained awake. Calvin Brooks, 63, moved through the lobby with the same calm rhythm he'd carried for decades. The floor gleamed under his mop. The marble reflected his face, dark, lined, and tired, yet steady. A lifetime of unseen nights had shaped him into a man who measured time not by clocks, but by the echo of his own footsteps. The younger employees barely noticed him. They hurried past with wireless earbuds, eyes glued to glowing screens. To them, Calvin was a relic, the security guy with the worn jacket and old-fashioned manners. Sometimes, he overheard jokes whispered near the elevators. "Bet he's never touched a computer," one intern laughed last week. Calvin didn't respond. He simply smiled, the kind of quiet smile that hides whole histories behind it. Every evening at 11:45, he made his final patrol through the corridors. Cameras blinked red like tired eyes. The building hummed with silent intelligence, servers cooling, data sleeping. He always lingered near the mainframe room a little longer than necessary, gazing at the humming door that required 3 keycards to open. The badge hanging from his belt gave him no access, yet his gaze carried something more potent than authority: memory. Years ago, before the gray in his hair, Calvin had built systems that men now swore were impossible. He'd worked in cyber defense for the military, writing encryption so complex that even he struggled to undo it years later. But after a scandal involving classified leaks, a case in which he was innocent but blamed, he vanished from the field. Voluntary retirement, the report said. He'd chosen silence over scandal, dignity over noise. Tonight, however, the silence felt different. He sensed it long before the alarms would sound. The subtle shift in the building's heartbeat, a delayed flicker in the security feed, a single red line blinking across the lower monitor, then disappearing. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To Calvin, it was the whisper of intrusion. He leaned closer to the screen, his reflection merging with the code. The old instincts woke up, stretching like an animal long caged. Someone, somewhere, was inside Nova's system. And judging by the trace patterns, it wasn't a routine scan, it was a deep surgical breach. Calvin pressed the intercom. "Control, this is Brooks on the night shift. You seeing this?" Static. No answer. He tried again, still silence. He frowned, set his mop aside, and reached under the counter where his personal notebook sat. Its pages were filled with scribbles of network diagrams, old protocols, formulas written in shorthand. Nobody knew he kept them. Nobody cared enough to look. He took a breath. For 20 years, he'd lived like a ghost in this building. Obedient, invisible, dismissed. But ghosts remember things. Ghosts know the walls better than the living. Footsteps echoed from behind. It was Mr. Sterling, the night operations manager, a man in his 30s with polished shoes and a smirk that came free with his title. "Brooks, what are you doing at the monitors again? You're paid to watch doors, not computers." Calvin didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the blinking feed. "There's something off in the network. I think someone's trying to access the mainframe." Sterling laughed. "You think? Don't tell me you're some kind of tech genius now." Calvin turned his head slowly. "Once upon a time," he said quietly. The younger man rolled his eyes. "Right? Just stick to cleaning floors, old man. IT will handle the real work." He left with the arrogance of the secure. Calvin watched him disappear into the hallway. Then, alone again, he whispered under his breath, "They won't handle it in time." The old notebook opened with a soft crack. He ran his fingers along a faded line of handwritten code. His own code, from decades ago. A signature algorithm that still pulsed beneath the surface of Nova's firewall. No one here knew it existed, but he did. He'd embedded it years earlier when the company acquired his former employer's database. He stared at the monitors once more. The red traces were multiplying. The attack was live. Outside, snow began to fall against the glass, white flakes melting on impact, like fleeting promises. Calvin pulled the chair closer and whispered to the machines that had long forgotten his name. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see if the old ghost still remembers how to haunt." The hum of the server room had always soothed Calvin. It was like standing inside a living heartbeat, steady, mechanical, eternal. But tonight, that heartbeat was faltering. On the monitors, streams of data cascaded like falling rain, breaking apart, reassembling, disappearing again. Someone was slicing through Nova Dynamics' firewall like it was paper. He adjusted his glasses and typed a command on the auxiliary console. A machine so old most of the IT staff didn't know it still worked. The interface blinked green, a relic from another era. To anyone else, it was outdated junk. To Calvin, it was a friend from another life. Lines of code began to scroll. The attack wasn't random. Whoever was behind it was skilled, surgical, methodical. They weren't after money or blackmail. They were stealing research, corporate secrets, something far bigger than financial data. Calvin's pulse quickened. He recognized the intrusion pattern. It was similar to one he'd seen during his military years. The same rhythm, the same signature moves. Someone out there was using a replica of his own encryption-breaking method. A strange calm came over him. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same genius that once protected nations was now being used to tear down corporations. He turned off the security lights to avoid detection from within the building and made his way to the mainframe floor. His keycard didn't open the door, of course not. But the corner panel had a maintenance port, and Calvin had always kept a small device in his pocket. A homemade data key wrapped in worn black tape. It was his last tie to the man he used to be. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside, the servers towered like silver monoliths, their blinking LEDs casting cold light across his dark skin. Each step echoed, lonely and deliberate. He placed the data key into the port. The screen on his handheld lit up with lines of code, his handwriting in digital form, old syntax no one used anymore. It was beautiful in a way, a forgotten language. Behind him, a voice cut through the hum. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Brooks?" Calvin froze. Sterling again. Angrier this time, his tie loosened, a phone in his hand. "I told you to stay out of restricted areas. You trying to get yourself fired?" Calvin didn't turn. "You're already breached," he said quietly. "If we don't act now, the data's gone." Sterling laughed nervously. "You think you know better than our IT department? You think?" The emergency alarms interrupted him. The lights flickered red. Every terminal in the room flashed a warning. Unauthorized transfer detected. Sterling's smirk vanished. "What's happening?" Calvin's fingers danced across the keyboard faster than any man his age should move. "They're deep inside the core. If they finish the upload, you'll lose every line of Nova's research. I can stop it, but you have to let me work." Sterling hesitated. Sweat gathered on his forehead. You're not even trained." Calvin's tone hardened. "I wrote this code before you were born." For the first time, Sterling saw him not as a janitor, not as a forgotten guard, but as something else entirely. The older man's calm authority cut through the panic. Sterling stepped aside. Calvin began typing commands, summoning old scripts from memory. Every keystroke was a heartbeat, every command a bridge between past and present. Then came the breakthrough, literally. The attackers had forced their way into the company's encryption core, but Calvin's embedded failsafe, a backdoor he'd once built to monitor data integrity, was still there, buried under years of updates. It wasn't elegant, but it was his. He activated it. The servers shuddered. The data transfer froze midstream. A digital lockdown sequence cascaded through the system. The power flickered, then steadied. Sterling stared at the monitors in disbelief. You stopped it." Calvin leaned back, exhaling. His hands trembled slightly. "For now," he said, "but they'll try again." Sterling's expression softened for the first time. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone who you really are?" Calvin gave a tired smile. "People only see what they want to see. Sometimes it's easier to let them." Outside, dawn began to rise. A thin line of gold cutting across the frozen skyline. For the first time in years, Calvin felt that same light inside him. But as he walked back toward the lobby, something on the monitor caught his eye. A new signal, hidden beneath the system's restored layers. The attack wasn't over. What he had stopped was only the first wave. And this time, whoever was behind it knew his name. By sunrise, Nova Dynamics had become a hive of chaos. Executives poured in with half-tied ties and caffeine-fueled panic. Screens glowed with status updates, red alerts, and half-written emails. The air smelled of burnt circuits and fear. Calvin stood in the far corner of the operations room, silent, unnoticed. He'd been awake for 30 hours straight. His jacket was wrinkled, his eyes weary, but his mind sharp as ever. He had traced the breach to an external IP, hidden beneath layers of proxy servers. Whoever was behind this wasn't an amateur. This was someone who knew him. He watched a live feed of binary code racing across the monitors. Every few seconds, a pattern emerged, a subtle signature embedded in the attack. It wasn't random. It was a taunt. The same encryption trick he had invented 25 years ago for a government defense project. Back then, he called it the Ouroboros key, a code that could eat itself to regenerate, making it nearly impossible to destroy. Only 3 people had ever seen its full structure. One of them was Calvin, and another was Elias Core, his former apprentice. Elias had been brilliant, impatient, hungry for recognition. He had accused Calvin of holding him back, of refusing to share credit for their joint work. When the military program collapsed under scandal, Elias disappeared, taking fragments of Calvin's code with him. The newspapers branded Calvin the weak link, the man responsible for the failure. He didn't fight back. He let silence swallow his defense. Now, decades later, the code that once defined his downfall had returned to haunt him. "Mr. Brooks," a woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Dana Whitmore, Nova's cybersecurity director. She was sharp, skeptical, and young enough to be his daughter. She studied him with cautious respect. "Sterling says you stopped the breach last night. How did you know what to do?" Calvin kept his gaze on the monitor. "Experience," he said simply. Dana folded her arms. "That's an understatement. You did something my entire team couldn't. The firewall logs show you access systems that haven't been touched in years. Who exactly are you?" He hesitated. For a moment, the old instinct to hide kicked in. But then he saw the panic spreading through the room, the helplessness of people who depended on systems they didn't understand. He took a breath. "Before I was a guard, I worked in encryption. Military level. I built some of the same systems Nova uses today." The room fell silent. Dana's eyes widened. "You mean you... Wait, you wrote the baseline defense algorithms we still use?" Calvin nodded once. "And whoever's attacking us knows how to break them, because they helped design them." Dana's professionalism cracked for a second. "You know who it is." "I have a strong guess," he said quietly. "And if I'm right, this isn't about money. It's about revenge." She exhaled slowly. "Then we need to stop him. Together." For the first time in years, someone had said that word, together, and meant it. They moved to the control terminal side by side. Calvin guided her through the old protocols, explaining line by line how the code regenerated itself. His tone was calm, instructive, like a teacher rediscovering the rhythm of his classroom. Dana watched him, half in awe, half in disbelief. "You could have been leading this company's entire security division," she said softly. "Why waste your life guarding doors?" He smiled faintly. "Because people stopped listening to the truth a long time ago. Sometimes it's easier to keep watch from the shadows." Hours passed. Together, they built a trap, a mirror server designed to lure the attacker into a controlled environment. Calvin coded with precision, fingers moving like they were remembering an old melody. When the system finally armed itself, Dana leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. "If this works, we'll trace his signal directly." "It'll work," Calvin said. But his voice carried a weight she didn't understand yet. At 7:03 p.m., the system pinged. A breach attempt, direct, aggressive. The trap was triggered. The digital snare tightened. The IP resolved in fragments, then fully, Los Angeles, California. Dana looked up. We've got him. But Calvin's face had gone pale. No, he whispered. He's got us. Before she could ask, the monitors went black. A new message appeared on the central screen, written in glowing red letters. You can't hide from your own creation, Calvin. Every terminal in the room shut down at once. Sparks hissed from the server racks. The building's power grid surged. In that moment, Calvin understood the trap had worked, but the enemy had been waiting for it. The hunter had become the hunted. Darkness swallowed Nova Dynamics. The hum of the servers went silent, leaving only the eerie mechanical clicks of emergency power units. The glow of the monitors vanished, replaced by flashing red lights from the backup system. Employees shouted over each other, voices trembling with confusion and fear. Dana turned toward Calvin. He shut us down completely. How did he bypass your failsafe? Calvin's voice was low, calm but strained. Because he didn't break it. He rewrote it. He knows how I think, line for line. Elias learned every habit, every weakness I had. Her eyes widened. So he's been planning this for years? He nodded slowly. Decades. The emergency lighting cast long shadows over the glass walls. Sterling burst into the room, sweat glistening on his forehead. Everything's down. Servers, power, security locks. What the hell is happening? Calvin didn't look at him. We're inside a recursive attack. The system's caught in a feedback loop. If we don't isolate the core in the next hour, the overload will corrupt the entire company database. Permanently. Sterling froze, panic visible in his every movement. Then do something. You stopped it before, didn't you? Dana stepped forward. He's trying, but the system's evolving against us. It's alive. That word hung in the air. Alive. Calvin stared at the dim glow of the emergency monitor as it flickered back to life. In the corner of the screen, a small icon pulsed. A serpent devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros key. His creation. Elias didn't just steal my code, Calvin murmured. He perfected it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small black-taped data key. The same one that had saved the company the night before. The tape was worn, the metal chipped, but the program inside it was pure, unaltered. His original encryption pattern still loyal to its maker. If I connect this, he said, it might counter his version. But once it starts, I won't be able to stop it. Dana hesitated. You mean it could destroy everything? Calvin looked up, his dark eyes filled with quiet certainty. Or save it. Sometimes those two things aren't as different as people think. He plugged in the data key. The lights flickered violently, the air crackling with static. A rush of code exploded across the monitors, ancient, raw syntax intertwined with Elias's newer patterns. It was like watching two minds argue in the language of machines. Then, a voice echoed through the speakers. You're still alive, old man? Calvin froze. The voice was familiar, unmistakable. Elias Core, his former apprentice, now disembodied through the network. Calvin spoke evenly. You always had a talent for theatrics, Elias, but you never learned patience. The voice laughed. Patience doesn't buy power. You could have ruled this field, Calvin, but you chose silence. You let them bury you while I built an empire. An empire built on theft, Calvin replied. On evolution, Elias snapped. You created a weapon of defense. I turned it into survival. This system doesn't belong to you anymore. Dana leaned toward the mic. Whoever you are, we'll trace you. Elias interrupted with a sneer. You already have. And what will you do, Ms. Whitmore? Arrest me with your firewalls? The monitors flashed, filling the room with streams of code. A new countdown appeared. 58 minutes. System purge initiated. Dana gasped. He's wiping everything. Calvin took a step forward, his face illuminated by the screen's pale glow. Not if I get to the root first. He began typing commands faster than Dana could follow, his mind returning to the man he once was, the coder who thought in logic and emotion at once. The room trembled as power systems strained. Sparks fell like artificial rain. Elias's voice taunted through the speakers. "You're too late, old man. You can't win a war against time." Calvin smiled faintly. "I don't need to win. I just need to remember." With one final command, he accessed a directory no one had touched in 20 years. An offline archive buried under layers of forgotten data. It was a system designed before Nova Dynamics even existed. Inside it was the one thing Elias couldn't overwrite. The original checksum, the truth of the code itself. He whispered to himself, "Integrity always leaves a trace." The countdown froze at 12 minutes and 47 seconds. The room went silent. Elias's voice grew quieter, uncertain now. "What did you do?" "I reminded the system who its creator was." A sharp hum filled the air. Then light. The monitors flared, restoring their original color. Lines of data scrolled upward. One final message displayed at the bottom. Root authority verified. Calvin Brooks. Unauthorized modifications quarantined. The purge halted. The building steadied. Dana turned to him in disbelief. "You did it." Calvin leaned heavily against the console, his breath shallow. "For now," he whispered. "But he's still out there. And this was only a warning." From the corner of the screen, the serpent symbol blinked once more before fading into darkness. Morning light spilled through the glass walls of Nova Dynamics, washing the once chaotic room in pale gold. The building hummed again, order restored at least on the surface. But beneath that quiet rhythm, tension still lingered like a pulse. Calvin sat alone in the break room, a cup of cold coffee in his hands. The white ceramic reflected his face, lined, weary, but resolute. For the first time in years, people had seen him not as a janitor, not as an invisible old man, but as something far more dangerous. A man who knew too much. Outside the door, muffled voices filled the corridor. Dana and Sterling were speaking with the board. He could hear fragments. Breach report, internal audit, liability. They spoke about data and damage, but not about people. That was the problem with modern technology. It measured loss in numbers, never in souls. He leaned back, closing his eyes. The voice of Elias still echoed in his mind. "You can't hide from your own creation." It wasn't just a threat. It was a truth. Elias had become the mirror of everything Calvin had once feared. Ambition without conscience, brilliance without humility. The door opened. Dana stepped in, her face pale from exhaustion but softened with gratitude. "They want to talk to you," she said quietly. Calvin didn't move. "The board." She nodded. "They know what you did, how you stopped the attack." He sighed. "And now they want to know if they can use me again." Dana hesitated. "They want to offer you a position, head of cybersecurity, full salary, benefits, public recognition." For a long time he said nothing. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Then he looked up, meeting her gaze. "Recognition is a strange thing, Dana. It never shows up when you earn it, only when someone else needs it." Her eyes softened. "You deserve this, Calvin. After what they did to you, after what Elias stole, this is your chance to step back into the light." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But the light burns differently when you've lived in the shadows too long." She sat across from him. "You saved this company and maybe more. If you walk away now, it'll look like you're running from what you built." He looked down at his hands, old, steady, scarred. "Maybe I am." Before she could answer, the overhead speakers crackled. "All department heads, report to conference room A. Immediate assembly." They exchanged a glance. Dana helped him up, and they made their way down the hallway. As they entered the room, Calvin felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. The board members sat at a long table, their expressions mixed. Admiration, guilt, curiosity. At the head sat Martin Hale, Nova's CEO, a man with perfect posture and perfect words. "Mr. Brooks," he began, voice smooth as glass. "It seems we owe you a great debt. Your quick thinking prevented a catastrophe that could have cost us billions." Calvin stood still. It wasn't quick thinking. It was preparation. Hale smiled thinly. "Of course. Still, we'd like to extend a formal offer. Head of our new cybersecurity initiative. With your expertise, we can rebuild public trust and ensure this never happens again. It was tempting. The promise of redemption, respect, stability. Yet Calvin's gaze drifted toward the glass walls overlooking the city, the world below, still moving, still indifferent. He thought of all the nameless people who kept it turning. The cleaners, the guards, the forgotten ones who kept watch while others slept. He took a slow breath. You don't need me at that desk, Mr. Hale. You need people who care enough to listen before it's too late. Hale frowned. You're turning us down? Calvin nodded once. You built a company on technology but forgot the humans behind it. That's why Elias could get this far. The danger isn't the code. It's the arrogance that believes it's unbreakable. The room fell silent. Dana's eyes glistened, half in awe, half in sadness. Hale's tone cooled. You're a remarkable man, Mr. Brooks, but the world moves fast. Idealism doesn't keep the servers running. Calvin smiled gently. No, but integrity does. He turned and walked toward the exit. No applause followed. No handshakes. Only silence. A heavy, respectful silence that filled the space he left behind. In the lobby, he stopped by the security desk where his old notebook still lay. The mop leaned against the wall beside it. He ran his hand over the worn leather cover, then tucked it under his arm. Dana caught up to him near the door. Where will you go? He looked out at the street, where the morning sun reflected off the wet pavement. Home. Maybe start teaching again. There's still time to pass on what matters before it's forgotten. She smiled faintly. You really think people will listen? He met her eyes. Someday they will. When the next storm comes, they'll remember the man who kept the lights on. The revolving doors opened. Cold air swept in, carrying with it the noise of the waking city. Calvin stepped outside, coat collar raised against the wind. Behind him, the building glimmered, safe, for now. And somewhere far away, a new terminal blinked to life. A message appeared briefly before vanishing into static. This isn't over, old friend. Calvin smiled to himself. It never is. He walked into the light, the city swallowing his silhouette like a secret it had just learned to keep. Weeks passed, and the world forgot what had happened inside Nova Dynamics. News outlets turned their attention to newer crises, newer scandals. Yet for those who had been inside that glass tower, something had shifted forever. The myth of invincibility had cracked. Calvin Brooks lived quietly again, though not in the same way as before. He no longer wore a security badge or polished marble floors under fluorescent light. Instead, he rented a small room above a hardware store in a quiet Detroit neighborhood. His desk was cluttered with old monitors, notebooks filled with faded equations, and a small photograph of his late wife, Angela. She had always believed in him, even when the world didn't. Most mornings, he brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall between narrow brick buildings. For the first time in decades, the silence felt like peace, not punishment. He had started teaching again. Free evening classes at the community center, open to anyone who wanted to learn. Teenagers with big dreams, veterans looking for a second start, single mothers rebuilding their lives. They came not just for lessons in code, but for lessons in resilience. Don't chase brilliance, he told them one night as they gathered around his old laptop. Chase clarity. Integrity isn't something you build once. It's something you prove every day. They listened, really listened. And in their wide, curious eyes, Calvin saw something he hadn't seen in years. Faith in learning, in truth, in themselves. After class, Dana stopped by. She had left Nova Dynamics too, disillusioned by the politics that followed the crisis. Together, they rebuilt what they had always wanted technology to be, a tool for connection, not control. She helped him set up a nonprofit, the Inner Circuit Foundation, teaching cybersecurity ethics in underfunded schools. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Calvin sat at his desk reviewing a student's project. A piece of code so elegant, it made him pause. It was a security algorithm written by a 16-year-old girl named Jada. Simple, strong, and incorruptible. He smiled to himself. The next generation's already better than we were. Then his old computer chimed. A single encrypted message appeared on screen, unsigned, glowing faintly in red. Still teaching, old man? Calvin's heart skipped a beat. It was Elias. He leaned closer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. You never learned to let go, did you? He murmured. A reply appeared instantly. You built a world of locks. I built the keys. The difference between us is I'm not afraid to use them. Calvin typed calmly. And the difference between us is I know when not to. There was a pause. Then another line appeared. You can't protect them all. Calvin smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I can teach them to protect themselves. The cursor blinked. Then the message vanished. No trace, no address, no signal. Only the faint hum of his machine remained. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. It was over, or perhaps it never would be. But that didn't matter anymore. The war between him and Elias wasn't about victory. It was about what they left behind. Outside, the city lights shimmered like a constellation of possibilities. Calvin stood, pulling his coat tighter, and gazed out the window. Across the street, a boy was walking home with a backpack slung over one shoulder, clutching a used laptop under his arm. The one Calvin had donated last week. In that small, quiet moment, he realized something profound. His code was no longer just a line of defense. It had become a lesson in honor. Integrity wasn't written in numbers or encrypted in machines. It lived in people, in every act of kindness, in every choice to do the right thing when no one was watching. He whispered softly, almost to himself, the world doesn't need more geniuses. It needs more guardians. The snow began to fall again, drifting through the amber streetlight glow. Calvin returned to his desk, opened a blank document, and began typing one final piece of code. Not to hide, not to defend, but to teach. At the top of the page, he wrote a single line. // the security guard's code, a legacy of honor. And as his fingers moved across the keys, the sound echoed through the room like a steady heartbeat. Measured, patient, unbreakable.